Hello everyone, I am here to do my January reading wrap up. I read 12 books in January, which isn't bad. My goal for the year is 100 books, which means I would need to read about 8 books per month to stay on track. So I definitely was on track and I exceeded what I needed to do for the month, so that was good. I ended up having a pretty good reading month. I read a decent amount of 4 stars, some 5 stars, a few 3 stars. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So, the first book that I finished in January was my reread of The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. I had been rereading this for a long time. I was at it for like months. I did it very slowly because I was annotating it. Let's see if I can find some pages. Yeah, so I like really thoroughly annotated the whole book. This is my favorite book, if I haven't mentioned that on the channel before. But I've read this book so many times, yet I had not read, see there's more annotations, I had not read the book physically ever. I had only ever listened to the audiobook. So it was a really cool experience getting to read this fully, just, physically reading it on paper. It was a very different experience than listening to it on audio. So I finished that in January. That was the first book that I finished. I believe it was like January 1st that I finished it. So that's the first one. Next, I read Death in Her Hands by Ottessa Moshfegh, which I don't have a physical copy of, but I have some more Moshfegh over here. Death in Her Hands is the most recent of Moshfegh's releases. I read it for a book discussion with a friend of mine who is a bookseller, and I have to say I was a little bit disappointed by that one. I ended up giving it 3 stars. It is about a older woman who lives on her own after her husband died, and she finds this note that says that this character Magda had been murdered or died, and she tries to figure out who did it, but it's almost as if she's coming up with the entire story, like she's writing a novel in a way. The mystery isn't really real, or the reader's at least kind of tossed around thinking maybe it's real, maybe it's not. And the concept of it sounded really cool, and I really like Ottessa Moshfegh's other books. I, started collecting them, and I like them a lot. But this one, it just didn't have the same punch that the other ones do. I didn't feel like it was what I'm used to in terms of her writing. It was a very different writing style, and kudos to her for going outside the box, but it just wasn't really for me. So I'm glad I read it just because I'm trying to read all of her books, but it was not a favorite of mine for sure. Okay, the next book I read, I finished, was Darkstalker Legends, the Wings of Fire Legends book by Tui T. Sutherland. So this book my boyfriend and I had been reading together for months. And again, this just happened to be one of the first books that I finished in January, so I counted it towards January, but I in no way read all of this in January. So yes, this I ended up finishing with my boyfriend in January. Gave it 5 stars. It was very intense in a lot of ways. Sometimes my boyfriend and I were just like, how is this a middle grade book? Like, it should be at least YA, because it was so intense. There was a lot of gore. There was a lot of intense emotions and dealings with like domestic abuse and family dynamics and things like that. So it was intense, but I really, really loved the way that it was written. I loved how Tui does not shy away from those really big issues that she needs to talk about. And yeah, overall, I really, really loved this one. Really happy that I read it. So while I'm talking about Wings of Fire, I might as well just tell you the other Wings of Fire books that I read this month, even if it's slightly out of order. I read all of these. I got onto a huge kick with these books. I started with Moon Rising, which is book 6, and I could not put them down. I kept reading them. We got through, my boyfriend and I ended up getting through Moon Rising, Winter Turning, which was on a reading vlog that I did, Escaping Peril, and Talons of Power. So all of those got read. They all got 5 stars, which was not the case for arc 1 of the series, which is books 1 through 5. I believe I gave 2 of those 4 stars and 3 of them 5 stars. But so far, there's only 1 book left in this arc of the series, and I have given all of them 5 stars. And I also gave Darkstalker 5 stars this month. So these are all Wings of Fire books that I have given 5 stars in the month of January. I read so many Wings of Fire books. But you know what? That makes me happy, and I'm not going to apologize for it. Even though they're middle grade, it's fine. So yes, I absolutely love this series. This is my favorite series of all time. It has solidified that for me after reading every single one of these books in January. Moving on. As part of the reading vlog that I did, I talked about Winter Turning, which I just said. And I also talked about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and The Martian. This is by Robert Louis Stevenson, and The Martian is by Andy Weir. I gave this one 4 stars and this one 3 stars. And I'm not really going to go too into it. You can see my full review in that video. It's just the last video on my channel. But I was really excited to read those as part of a video where I read my boyfriend's, books that he recommended to me or wanted me to read. So that was really fun, and I enjoyed reading those books and getting to talk to him about what I thought of them. So next, let's see. I read another audiobook that I don't have the physical copy for, but it was called Self-Portrait with Boy by Rachel Lyon. And I have been really into unreliable or unlikable narrator stories, especially from a female perspective. So this particular one was about a artist. She's a photographer, and she's taking a self-portrait a day for like a year or something like that. And in one of her self-portraits, she happens to capture a young child falling from the roof of her apartment complex. So it is a very morbid setup to a story, but it is absolutely fascinating seeing how that experience shapes her art, her relationships, her career, and it completely blasts her into this fame at the end of the book. So it was a really interesting concept. I ended up giving that one 4 stars. I kind of hemmed and hawed between 4 and 5, but it wasn't like a favorite book of all time, so I ended up giving it a 4 star. But it was definitely interesting. If you can handle that kind of grim topic, I would recommend it because it was really, really interesting. Okay, next I read the sequel to Surviving the Applewhites, which is one of my favorite books. It is called The Applewhites at Wit's End. It's also currently back at the library. I already returned it. But that one, I ended up giving 4 stars, I believe. It wasn't as good as the original Surviving the Applewhites. Surviving the Applewhites is about a boy who is a delinquent, quote-unquote, teen boy, who ends up living with this homeschooler family on this big plot of land, and they're very eccentric and strange, and it's about how they kind of help him become a better person and change and grow. So I absolutely love that book. The second book is about the same family, plus this delinquent kid is still living with them. So his name is Jake. So Jake and the Applewhite family have a summer camp where they bring in a bunch of other kids who are talented in a particular field of art, and they have this whole camp surrounding it. And it's a very, very fun idea and plot. And I really liked seeing all the different dynamics of the characters, especially the new younger kid characters who came in for the camp. But it didn't have the same charm as the first book. The first book was a book that I read when I was a little kid, and it really shaped a lot of my life experience, thinking back about that. But the second book wasn't quite that way for me, probably just because it didn't have the nostalgia. But I did really enjoy it, so I ended up giving it 4 stars. And the last book I want to talk to you about is The Need by Helen Phillips. So I read this in January also, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. And the main thing I wanted to say about The Need is that it is fascinating. The concept for this just sounded so interesting. The Need is about a woman who is a mother of 2 kids, and she is, I believe it's a paleobiologist. I think that's what it is. But she looks for fossils, and she has this big pit that she works in to find fossils. And she starts finding these weird things in there that shouldn't be in there, such as a Bible that all of the pronouns for God are female. So that was really interesting. But she ends up finding that there is an intruder in her home. And she's not sure if she's just paranoid or anxious or what is going on. And the intruder ends up being herself. I won't give you more than that because that's, not technically a spoiler. But the intruder ends up being a different version of herself. So it was incredibly interesting. And you kind of don't know, like I was saying, unreliable narrators, unreliable or unlikable narrators. You don't really know if she's telling the truth or not. Technically, this is a third person narrative, but it is really over her shoulder. So I'm considering it like a unlikable narrator anyway. But yeah, you can't always tell whether or not anything is real that she's saying or if she's all just making it up or thinks she knows what's going on. The only qualms that I really had with this that I didn't give it 5 stars for was the style of writing. I did not enjoy the way that things were described in this book. I felt like there was a lot of, I don't know, I just didn't like the language. I don't really know exactly why. I just was not a fan of the language and how it was written. I just found it to be a little bit choppy, I think, is how I would describe it. So the story itself was fascinating. I loved the idea of it. I liked the character development, but I did not love the writing style. Those were all the books that I read in January. I ended up reading 12 books, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to see more videos like this, feel free to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.